The king and prince were delighted to see that the king of the peacocks was as handsome as possible. He had curly golden hair and was very pale and wore a crown of peacock feathers. When he saw Rosette's brothers, he knew at once that they were strangers, and stopping his carriage, he sent for them to speak to him. When they had greeted him, they said, "Sire, we have come a very long way to show you a very beautiful portrait." So saying, they drew from their traveling bag the picture of Rosette. The king looked at it in silence for a long time, but at last said, "I could not have believed that there was such a beautiful princess in the world." "Indeed, she is really 100 times prettier than that," said her brothers. "I think you must be making fun of me," replied the king of the peacocks. "Sire," said the princess, "my brother is a king like yourself. He is called the king, and I am called the prince, and that is the portrait of our sister, the Princess Rosette. We have come to ask if you would like to marry her. She is as good as she is beautiful, and we will give you a bushel of gold pieces for her dowry." "Oh, with all my heart," replied the king, "and I will make her very happy. She shall have whatever she likes, and I shall love her dearly, but I only warn you that if she is not as pretty as you have told me, I will have your heads cut off." "Oh, certainly we agree to that," said the brothers in one breath. "Very well, off with you into prison and stay there until the princess arrives," said the king of the peacocks. And the princes were so sure that Rosette was far prettier than her portrait that they went without a murmur, and they were very kindly treated, so that they might not feel dull. The king came to visit them often. As for Rosette's portrait, that was taken up to the palace, and the king did nothing but gaze at it all day and all night. The king and the prince had to stay in prison, and they sent a letter to the princess telling her to pack up all her treasures as quickly as possible and come to them, as the king of the peacocks was waiting to marry her, but they did not say that they were in prison for fear of making her uneasy. When Rosette received the letter, she was so delighted that she ran about telling everyone that the king of the peacocks was found and that she was going to marry them. Guns were fired, and fireworks set off. Everyone had as many cakes and sweetmeats as they wanted. For 3 days, everybody who came to see the princess was presented with a slice of bread and jam and a nightingale's egg and some hippocras. After having thus entertained her friends, she distributed her dolls among them and left her brother's kingdom to the care of the wisest old men in the city, telling them to take charge of everything and not to spend any money, but to save it up until the king should return, and above all, do not forget to feed her peacock. She set out, only taking with her her nurse, the nurse's daughter, and the little green dog Frisk. They took a boat and put it out to sea, carrying with them the bushel of gold pieces and enough dresses to last Princess Rosette 10 years if she wore 2 every day and did nothing but laugh and sing. The nurse asked the boatman, Can you take us to the kingdom of the peacocks?" But he answered, "Oh no," and she said, you must take us, and he answered, very soon, and then the nurse said, will you take us, and the boatman answered, yes, and then she whispered in his ear, "Do you want to make your fortune?" And he said, "Certainly I do." "I can tell you how to get a bag of gold," said she. "I ask for nothing better," said the boatman. "Well," said the nurse, "tonight, when the princess is asleep, you must help me throw her into the sea, and when she is drowned, I will put her beautiful clothes on my daughter, and we will take her to the king of the peacocks, who will be only too glad to marry her, and as your reward you shall have your boat full of diamonds." The boatman was very much surprised at the proposal, and he said, "But what a pity to drown such a pretty princess." However, at last the nurse persuaded him to help her, and when the night came, the princess was fast asleep as usual, with Frisk curled up upon his own cushion at the foot of her bed. And the wicked nurse fetched the boatman and her daughter, and between them they picked up the princess, feather bed, mattress, pillows, blankets, and all, and threw her into the sea without even waking her. Now, luckily, the princess's bed was entirely stuffed with phoenix feathers, which are very rare and have the property of always floating upon water. So Rosette went on swimming about as if she could have been in a boat. After a little while, she began to feel very cold and turned round so often that she woke Frisk, who, starting up and having a very good nose, smelt the soles and the herrings so close to him that he began to bark. He barked so loud and so long that he woke all the other fish who came swimming round the princess's head and poking at it with their great heads. As for her, she said to herself, "How our boat does rock upon the water! I'm really glad that I'm not as uncomfortable as I have been tonight." The wicked nurse and the boatmen, who were by this time quite a long way off, heard Frisk barking and said to each other, "That horrid little animal and his mistress are drinking to our health in the sea water now. Let us make a haste to land, for we must be quite near the city of the King of the Peacocks." The king had sent 100 carriages to meet them, drawn up by every kind of strange animal. There were lions and bears and wolves and stags, horses and buffaloes, eagles and peacocks. The carriage intended for the Princess Rosette had 6 blue monkeys who could turn somersaults and dance on a tightrope, and do many other charming tricks. Their harness was all of crimson velvet with gold buckles, and behind the carriage walked 60 beautiful ladies chosen by the king to wait upon Rosette and amuse her. The nurse had taken all the pains imaginable to deck out her daughter. She put on her Rosette's prettiest frock and covered her with diamonds from head to toe. But she was so ugly that nothing could make her look nice, and what was worse, she was sulky and ill-tempered and did nothing but grumble all the time. When she stepped up from the boat and the escort sent by the King of the Peacocks caught sight of her, they were so surprised that they could not say a single word. "Now then, look alive," cried the false princess. "If you don't bring me something to eat, I will have all your heads cut off." And then they whispered one to the other, "Well, here's a pretty state of things. She's as wicked as she is ugly. What a bride for our poor king. She certainly was not worth bringing from the other end of the world." But she went on ordering them all about, and for no fault at all she would give them slaps and pinches. As the procession was so long, it advanced but slowly, and the nurse's daughter sat up in her carriage to try to look like a queen. But the peacocks, who were sitting upon every tree to salute her, and who had made up their minds to cry, "Long live our beautiful queen," when they caught sight of the false bride, could not help but crying, "Oh, how ugly she is!" which offended her so much that she said to the guards, "Make haste and kill these insolent peacocks who have dared to insult me." But the peacocks only flew away laughing at her. The rogue of a boatman, who noticed all this, said softly to the nurse, "This is bad business for us, gossip. Your daughter ought to have been prettier." But she answered, "Be quiet, stupid, or you'll spoil everything." Now when they told the king that the princess was approaching, "Well," said he, did her brothers tell me truly? Is she prettier than her portrait?" "Sire," they answered, if she were as pretty as that, would do very well." "That's true," said the king, "but I, for one, shall be quite satisfied if she is." "Let us go and meet her." For they knew by the uproar that she had arrived, but they could not tell what all the shouting was about. And the king could hear the words, "How ugly she is, how ugly she is," and he fancied that they must refer to some dwarf that the princess was bringing with her. It never occurred to him that could apply to the bride herself. The Princess Rosette's portrait was carried at the head of the procession, and after it walked the king, surrounded by his courtiers. He was all impatience to see the lovely princess, but when he caught sight of the nurse's daughter, he was furiously angry, and would not advance another step, for she was really ugly enough to have frightened anybody. "What?" he cried. "Have the 2 rascals who are my prisoners dared to play such a trick as this? Do they propose that I shall marry this hideous creature? Let her be shut up in my great tower with her nurse and all those who brought her here, and as for them, I will have their heads cut off." Meanwhile, the king and the prince, who knew that their sister must have arrived, made themselves smart and sat expecting every minute to be summoned to greet her. So when the gaoler came with soldiers and carried them down into a black dungeon which swarmed with toads and bats, and where they were up to their necks in water, nobody could have been more surprised and dismayed than they were. "This is a dismal kind of wedding," they said. What can have happened that we should be treated like this? They must mean to kill us." And this idea annoyed them very much. 3 days passed before they heard any news, and the King of the Peacocks came and berated them through a hole in the wall. "You have called yourselves king and prince," he cried, "to try to make me marry your sister. But you are nothing but beggars, not worth the water you drink. I mean to make short work with you, and the sword is being sharpened that will cut off your heads." "King of the Peacocks," answered the king angrily, "you had better take care of what you are about. I am as good a king as yourself, and I have a splendid kingdom, and robes and crowns, and plenty of good red gold to do what I like with. You are pleased to jest with someone about having our heads cut off. Maybe you think we have stolen something from you?